in the last class about the factorial designs. That was the last class discussion.
Yes.
Which was held on factorial designs. And the factorial designs meant for, understanding or measuring the contribution of the independent variable as well as the combination effect of all the independent variables in the dependent variable. For that purpose, we use factorial designs. And then in that factorial designs, we have seen two designs. One is 2 into 2 design. The other one is 2 into 2 into 2 design.
Yeah.
So each factor of the variable has two levels. Two variables means each variable has two levels. And then 2 into 2, I think you are going to have some 4 groups there. Then you are trying to understand the effect of these 4 groups on the dependent variable. That is 2 into 2 factorial design. The other one is 2 into 2 into, there are 3 2's.
8.
So example is also mentioned. It was with regard to the retention levels of the students. Because modes of presentation was one variable that was considered. The other one was the time or otherwise number of presentations. The third one was noise. These are the 3 independent variables which are tried out for measuring the retention learning of the students, how much they have retained. Which method is more effective? The first one is, first variable that they tried is mode of presentation, which is divided into 2, auditor presentation, then visual presentation. The next one is the number of presentations, one full presentation, and next one is 2 complete presentations. And the third variable is disturbance, presence of noise, and noise absence. These are the 2 levels for each independent variable. And we are trying to see the effect of all these factors on the retention of the learning. So which one of these factors are able to influence the retention of the students with regard to learning? For that purpose, this particular 2 into 2 factorial design is required. And for calculation purposes, we have to use the F-test, analysis of variance. We can call it as analysis of variance. By using this analysis of variance test, we come to know which factor is able to contribute better among all the factors which are listed out or used for studying the variance in the dependent variable. So that was all about. And finally, we have seen which groups. Is it between groups or within group design? Which group is better one? That we have seen this. Between groups means you are supposed to have 2 groups. And then for within groups means single group can be tried out. That is single group or within group design. Between group means you are supposed to have 2 groups and then you have to compare those 2 groups. Within group design means single group is enough for that. And people say that the within group design is better than this between groups because between groups means you are supposed to have more number of persons, and those member of persons may attend or may not attend, and again require to have facilities for them also. That way it may be controlling that between group design may be difficult for the experimenter, and people suggest that within group design is a controllable and it can also be manageable group, and the number of errors would also be very less, and the cost of this experiment would also be very less. That's the reason why people suggest that within group design can be used. So with regard to evaluation of these 2 designs, between group and within group designs, which one is better? Here they're talking about. So just now we have seen that within group design is a better one. How is it better and advantages? What are the advantages of this within group designs? They say that users participants more economically. There may not be much expenditure. The second one is saves laboratory time also. And moreover, the oxygen level also important. If more number of students or the persons are present in that room, The consumption of oxygen requires a lot. So therefore, that is also one of the advantages. If it is a small group, if it is a within group design, then also reduces error variance. The error variance may be large in between group design, whereas it is very less with regard to within group designs. That's the reason why we prefer to use within group design. These are the advantages of this within group design, and researchers suggest that within group design is the best. It's not best, I can say, but it's a better design than between group designs. So apart from the advantages that particular within group design, we have also disadvantages of within group design. Number one is use of participants. The within group design is far more economic in terms of the sample, since it uses the same group in different experimental conditions. But it may not be feasible for the researcher to have a larger number of participants. It involves a lot of time, energy, money, and other factors. Moreover, as the participants number increase, it will be increasingly difficult for the researcher to monitor them properly. So if it is a bigger group, it will be very difficult to manage. That's what he's telling. And of course, within group design is better. That's what he's mentioning. Then control of error variance is also mentioned here. The disadvantages of within group design, control of error variance.
Sir, slide move చేయట్లేదు sir.
Sir, I'm talking about the last one, not
Last
the
one,
present.
yeah, not
I'm
this.
just repeating because this is not covered in the
Yes.
last class. We can move that to PPT whenever it comes, okay? Na?
Yeah.
But just I'm reviewing what has happened in the last class. Huh?
That's right.
So these are the some of the disadvantages even with this within a group design. Error control of error variance would also be there. Practicality may not be there. Practice effects will also be there even within this group design, and the participants' emotional states will also creep into the experiment. That's the reason why we cannot say the results are completely due to experiment, but emotional states of the participants will also contribute. We can call them as confounding variables or extraneous variables, which will also contribute to the experiment. So this is one of the disadvantages of this. For any within group or between group designs, because the inner feelings of the individuals cannot be controlled, so that's going to contribute certain things to the dependent variables. So experimental mortality. So in the middle, some of the participants may also die. Mortality rate would also be there, or otherwise they will also not attend or drop out from the experiment. They will not respond to the experiment also. So if you are continuously asking them and disturbing them for your experiment, means some of them will also drop out, or some of them also miss out, and they may also disappear. So these are some of the disadvantages. Even within group design is good. Still, we can find some of these disadvantages with the group, but it's better than that between group design, because which requires a large number of participants, and manageability of the controlling of those participants would be difficult. Moreover, it would be expensive for the researcher. He cannot find even the laboratory necessary for conducting the experiment for those two groups, or otherwise between groups research design. So this is all about the last one, which some of those things were missed out, not discussed. That's the reason why I'm just repeating. Now we are moving into today's class discussion, that is quasi-experimental and non-experimental designs. Now this is the PPT, which is of course on the screen, available on the screen. Now we can also follow this PPTs for this quasi-experimental and non-experimental designs. What is this quasi-experimental design? That the title itself indicates quasi, not completely. It's not complete, full, total, which should satisfy all the conditions to be a good experiment. So to be a good experiment, there are certain standards which are set for the experiment, and particularly quasi-experiment design doesn't serve or doesn't fulfill or satisfy all those standards which are required to be a very good experimental design. So we are not able to fulfill or satisfy all those standards. Then we can call such kind of experiments as quasi-experimental designs. Quasi-experimental designs. Again, I should also inform you, my dear friends, And most of the experiments which are conducted on human beings, they're all quasi-experimental designs because you cannot control all the variables. The inner factors which will also contribute, you cannot control. Just now we have seen the emotional states of the individuals or the persons which are not considered for the experiment will also contribute for the dependent variable. That's the reason why most of the experiments that are conducted on the human beings, they're all quasi-experimental designs to my knowledge. To my knowledge, most of the experimental designs are quasi-experimental designs because they are conducted on the human beings and you cannot control the inner traits of the human beings or the individuals. They can also exert their influence on the dependent variable which you do not have any kind of strategy to control all those inner traits or inner feelings or emotional states of the individuals. So therefore, most of the experimental or experiments, they are quasi-experimental designs. So a quasi-experiment is one that applies an experimental interpretation to results but does not meet all the highest standards of the experiment. So these quasi-experimental design does not quasi-experimental design does not satisfy all those standards of the experiment. That's the reason why we can call it as quasi-experimental design. Even the experiment not be perfect, even the experimenter may not be perfect, and it may be difficult for the experimenter to control variables also. And again, there may be certain facilities to conduct this properly. So the apparatus which are required for this experiment may also be missing out certain things. They are not pakka. If those things are missing out or not there with the experiment, then we can call them as quasi-experimental design. So the problem with the experimental, the problem with the experiment itself, the problem with the accommodation itself, the problem with the individual itself. So all these things should also be there. So when these things are present, so such a kind of things, normally it would be very difficult to control. That's the reason why we can call such a kind of experiments as quasi-experimental designs. They are not complete or full experiments. So it is useful in situations where the researcher has some control over the direct manipulation of the independent variables, but fails to arrange for the other basic requirements of a true experimentation, that is creating equal groups. So it may be impossible, I cannot say impossible, but it may be very difficult to create equal groups because individual differences are there. Two human beings are not alike. They are not alike with respect to many factors. So when the human beings are completely different with each other or with one another, when there is no equity, then automatically there is some kind of difficulty. You cannot say that experiment which is included the groups which are not equal. So when there are no equal groups, I think it's going to be quasi-experimental designs. Normally, it will be very, very difficult for an experimenter to have that kind of to get equal groups for the experiment. So that's the reason why you can call these experimental designs as quasi-experimental designs, but they are not perfect. They are not full. They are not completely giving the experimental results, but there should be some kind of error with quasi-experimental designs when you compare with the true experimental designs or true experimental experiments. Then what are the various types of quasi-experimental designs? Earlier units, we have also seen some of the experiments. So those experiments, when a true experiment, I think there are different kinds of types of experimental designs. And if you can recall all those experimental designs, what we discussed in the earlier classes, same may be the case here also. But only thing is, these no groups are not equal, and there may not be pakka kind of thing. But only thing is, whatever that you have seen, the groups which are included in the experimental groups should also be seen here. But these groups here, what we are talking about in quasi-experimental designs, they are not equal, they are not perfect, they are not like, they are completely, I cannot say completely different, but certainly there would be some kind of variation with regard to the groups itself. That's the reason why If we can have idea about all those experimental designs which you discussed, same is the case, but only thing is we are missing out certain things. Other than that, it's okay. Example, one group pre-test and post-test design. This is one of the types of quasi-experimental designs. One group pre-test and post-test design. Group is one. Then you are going to have the pre-test before conducting the experiment. I think this kind of experimental design you have seen earlier also have discussed this one. And the same experimental design is also included in quasi-experimental designs. But that particular design, what we are talking in quasi-experimental design, this one group pre-test and post-test design is not a pakka one, but there may be some kind of deficiencies. There in the experimental design also, one group pre-test and post-test design, you might have seen that. We have also discussed them. We are also discussing the same kind of experimental design because since there is a deficiency, because that design is not able to satisfy other standards. So one group pre-test and post-test design. Here, example is introducing a new method for teaching maths to school students. This is the example. Introducing a new method for teaching maths to school students. So initially the experiment tests the knowledge of students in maths and then introduces the new teaching method. After teaching, the post-test will be conducted. After teaching is over, the post-test will be conducted and the results of pre-test and post-test will be compared to find out the efficacy of the teaching method. Is it clear, sir?
Yeah.
Group
Yeah.
is one. Then for that purpose, pre-test has to be conducted to understand the knowledge related to the issue that you are going to teach. That has to be measured before using that particular method, teaching method. Then the teaching comes after completion of the teaching, then you are going to measure or conduct the test, which we can call it as post-test. Then there would be comparison between the pre-test scores and the post-test scores to find out the efficacy of the teaching method. If the post-test score is better than the pre-test score, then you can also conclude that this particular teaching method has edge over it has some kind of impact. We can say we cannot edge. He has impact because the pre-test scores, say for example, the mean of the pre-test is about 55%, 55. Then after experimentation, after teaching, then you are going to the post-test. Then the post-test mean is 75. So pre-test mean is 55 and the post-test mean is 75. So there is a variation of nearly 22 mean points. Am I right?
Yeah.
Those 22 mean points will be attributed to the new teaching method. Just because of this new teaching method, you find the variation of nearly 20 mean points. So therefore here the teaching method has to be used. Before that, the knowledge of the students in that particular topic has to be tested. Then the teaching would come. After completion of the teaching, post-test has to be conducted. Then the post-test scores and the pre-test scores are to be compared. That will tell you how efficacy the teaching method is for teaching mathematics. If it is efficacy means if it is efficient or it is a better one on the base of the results, then you can use that kind of teaching method that we are going to suggest or recommend. This is the best method or this is the better method that you can employ for teaching mathematics. Such kind of suggestion would be coming from the experimenter. The limitation is any new method may yield better results and we cannot say that the change is due to new method only. Whenever there is a new thing, am I right? People are interested, curious to know about it. It may be a new thing, new method, new operators, new gadgets, isn't it? New devices. Whenever we talk about all these things, new gadgets, new methods, and other things, automatically the motivation level of the students would be little bit higher than what it was earlier. So which is not seen earlier, the method which is not seen earlier or the devices that are used by the experimenter may be new. So when these things are new, automatically that new things would also motivate the students. So that is one of the limitations of this. So we cannot say completely that this is due to only the new teaching method. But to some extent, we can infer that new teaching method is slightly better than the other method. That way you can also conclude, but this is the limitation. Chance of for other events to occur between the pre-test and post-test. So because since there is a time between the pre-test and the post-test, and many things will also occur. So the experimenter has control over them, which can influence the results. So if it doesn't have any control over those things which are also happening between the pre-test and the post-test, many things, many events, many activities would also be taking place. So the effect of those events or the activities may also carry over, and for that purpose, the researcher is supposed, or the experimenter is supposed to have control over them. If he has control over them, then it would be better one. Then we can also conclude that this new teaching method for teaching mathematics is better than the other methods. That way we can conclude. This is one group pre-test and post-test design. Next one is non-equivalent comparison group design. Non-equivalent comparison group design. So it speaks there should be two groups. You can compare when there are two groups or three groups, isn't it? Am I
Yeah.
right, friends?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when there is a single group, you cannot compare, but you can compare the pre-test and the post-test if it is single group.
Single group.
But here we are going to use two groups for comparison purposes, and those two groups are not equivalent. Because for this purpose, when they are non-equivalent groups, for this purpose, what we have to do is already formed groups can be considered. In other words, the participants are not randomly assigned to the experimental group. So already there may be groups. It may be mathematics group, or it may be science group, or it may be some other groups also. So already if there are groups like that, you can also use those groups for experimentation of this particular design, non-equivalent comparison group design. So already groups would be formed by the institutions, because there's a science group, science subject research base. Those students will come under science group, and mathematics group means those students who will be studying the mathematics. We can also a group of mathematics background. So in other words, the participants are not randomly, because here they the problem or the issue that is not considered is randomization of the participants. Randomization, because these participants are not randomly assigned to the experimental group. Two groups, experiment and control groups, are necessary. One would be receiving the treatment, the other will not receive any treatment. These groups are non-equivalent and may differ in numerous ways. With regard to design, with regard to gender, they differ. With regard to IQ, they differ. With regard to ACS, they differ. With regard to locality, they differ. With regard to occupation, they differ. With regard to literacy levels, they differ. These are the numerous ways, because these are the various differences, because that's the reason why they are not equivalent in many matters. Numerous ways, these two groups participants are different. We can call them as non-equivalent groups, non-equivalent groups. So different lengths. So example here is when you take up this, or when you use this kind of group design, non-equivalent comparison group design, then what we have to do is some example is quoted. Different length counseling sessions to the parolees. You know parolees, am I right? Those
Yeah.
people will be given leave. Prisoners.
Yeah.
Those we can call them parolees. So for them, counseling sessions would be organized. So because the length of the session, because they are talking about the length of the counseling sessions. So how the length of the counseling session will affect the behavior of the parolees? That is the question. The question is the length of the counseling. If lesser the length of the counseling, then the violations would be very high. If the length of the counseling is very high, then the errors with regard to the paroles will be very less. That's what it will be concluded. So here the length of counseling session to the parolees, the first group has counseling for 12 months and the second group has 9 months. The results indicated the length counseling as negatively related to parole violations. That means negatively related to parole violations, because number of violations will come down when the length of the counseling is very high, very long. The counseling is very long. That means 12 months counseling course has given better results than 9 months counseling course with respect to the violent behavior of the parolees. Am I clear, sir?
Yeah.
Parolees are the participants here. Then here they are using this length of counseling as independent variable. Then for one group is a 12 months counseling course. For the other groups, a 9 months counseling course. Then they're tested with regard to the violations. And it is clearly indicated that the 12 months counseling course has better results in better results as far as the violations are concerned, because they are not going to violate many things. So the violations would not be that much if it is 12 months counseling course. Then 9 months counseling course, still they are not able to match with the 12 months counseling course. That means the longer the counseling, the better the results with regard to the parole violations. Am I clear, sir?
Yes, sir.
The longer or the length of the counseling, the longer the counseling session, the higher the better results. That means the lesser the counseling length, then the violations would be very high. That's what it is concluded here. So the groups are here the non-equivalence groups. And then, of course, for that purpose, he has given the example of parolees with regard to their behaviors, violation behaviors. Then this longer period of counseling will help for controlling or checking the behavior of the parolees. Then unrelated comparison group design with the pre-test and post-test. Unrelated comparison. So we can call it as intact group kind of design. Intact group kind of design. Unrelated comparison group design with pre-test and post-test. Then here we require intact groups have to be selected. Intact groups have to be selected. For example, the example is, which are those intact groups? Already groups are formed. Say, for example, you can take up this engineering colleges. You find civil engineering students and mechanical engineering students are intact group for our for your experiment. So already this branch, mechanical branch students, also civil engineering branch students. They are the two groups. Here the experimenter has considered for the experiment. So no randomization of the subject here. No randomization is done. Already the groups are intact, which are formed by the institution itself because of the branch. Then here there is no randomization of the subjects. Here it is not randomized. Whoever is coming for taking admission that has become is a member of that particular group. So we find civil engineering students as one group, and then mechanical engineering students as the other groups. We can call them as intact groups. Selected randomly for one group before the psychology course. So psychology course they want to introduce. Psychology course for these civil engineering students and mechanical engineering students, for they want to introduce this psychology course. Before introducing psychology course to one group, the pre-test has to be conducted for measuring the emotional intelligence. So psychology course is meant for bringing some emotional intelligence, emotional control, emotional intelligence. EI means emotional intelligence. For that, to bring out that one, this psychology course is introduced for the students of this engineering students, which are intact groups. Before introducing psychology course to one group, the pre-test has to be conducted for measuring the emotional intelligence for both the groups. And after finishing the course, the researcher has to conduct the post-test for both the groups. The results have to be compared using statistical techniques. If the gain of the students of experimental group is higher, than the control group, the psychology course has impact on emotional intelligence of the students. So one group is experimental group for which the psychology course is introduced. Then the other group is the control group for which the emotional psychology course is not introduced. Then one is, of course, experimental group for which the psychology course will be taught or introduced. The other one is control group for which, there would not be a psychology course. Then there will be a pre-test for both the groups. And then after some finishing the course, the research has to come to the poster for both the groups. Then results have to be compared using statistical, relevant statistical techniques. And if the gain of the students of experimental group is higher, gain means the changes that occurred as a result of psychology course. So when the psychology course is introduced to one group, then if there is any impact of that impact is, in other words, we can call it as gain. If it impacts, if the psychology course impacts with regard to the emotional intelligence of the students, so then we can call it as the gain. Students gain means achievement is the students gain after conducting the test. After conducting the test, you are getting the scores. Then we can call it as a gain. Those scores, we can call them as gains. Similarly here, after conducting this test, say psychology course is introduced, the test is conducted for both the groups, and if there is any variation, that variation is to be attributed to the psychology course, variation in terms of emotional intelligence. If you find any difference between the emotional intelligence of one group or the other group, then you have this psychology course has impact or effect on the emotional intelligence of the students. So because who is better emotionally intelligent, who can adjust emotionally intelligent, who can adjust very well. So such kind of things we call them as emotionally intelligent. They're very strong people. Emotionally intelligent people are very, very strong. They cannot, immediately irritate themselves. They try to understand the things better than the other people. So the psychology course has advantages if this course is introduced in the engineering stream. And I am sure the students will be, we are going to get very good students with very good emotional intelligence. That's very essential factor for anybody. It's not only for the students of engineering, for everybody. This emotional intelligence is a question of patience, it's a question of understanding, it's a question of adjustment, it's a question of helping, it's a question of other things also. They cannot irritate themselves immediately. So such kind of emotional intelligence to be brought out means then psychology course has to be introduced in all the streams. But here the example is we have taken as engineering students. So the gain of the students of experimental group is higher than the control group, means this is the effect of the psychology course which has impacted the emotional intelligence of the students. This is known as unrelated comparison. So because the groups are unrelated, one is civil engineering, the other one is mechanical engineering, right? So that way they are not related. Their stream is different and the stream of the other is different from the other one. Next one is interrupted time series designs. These are all, we are studying all these designs under quasi-experimental designs because there is no such a randomization too much here. And then interactive groups are considered, and then the non-related groups are also compared. Then also we are talking about non-equivalent groups. So non-equivalent itself indicates this is not pakka. The groups are not equal. That is quasi-experimental. Similarly, the groups are not related. That is also quasi-experimental kind of thing because the groups are not related. They are not one. They are not, same stream or the same branch. The participants are not from the same branch. So therefore, so unrelated groups, you are comparing the unrelated groups by introducing this psychology course for them, how it is able to bring out, how is it able to bring out the emotional intelligence of the students. So I think when these things are there which are not satisfying the standards of the experimental designs. All these things, whatever we are discussing, they are not completely something or the other. Somewhere or the other, there is some kind of deficiency with regard to relation, with regard to variation, with regard to equivalent groups and other things. They are varied. They are not equal. So next one is interrupted time series design. This is also a part of, this is also one of the types of quasi-experimental design, interrupted time series design. In this design, the researcher gathers the data in the different dependent variable at different times for fixing the baseline. I think you might have heard about these baseline surveys, especially for those students who have this, working in the schools. The candidates who are working in the schools, they know pretty well about the baseline surveys which are initiated by the government of India to understand their level of learning. You know pretty well about the learning, and even though that fellow is, if you think the students, if you consider the students of the schools, if he is in the 8th class or class 8, his standards may not be matching what is expected from class 8, because a just promoter is just promoted irrespective of the standards. So that is for that purpose, in order to understand how to improve these things, then we try to have this kind of interrupted time series design wherein you are trying to fix the baseline. If you know the baseline or the standards, the present standards of, it may be class 8 or class 7, whatsoever the class you may be taking. So what are their levels of learning at present on the whole? If you know that particular baseline, they say the most of the students are at this level. If you know that level, which we can call it as baseline, then we try to improve upon their learning from that baseline. So I think then this intervention will be for this purpose. The research gathers the data in the different variable at different times for fixing the baseline. Then the intervention will be introduced after fixing the baseline. At the end of the intervention, their data will be gathered on the dependent variable. So you are trying to fix this baseline on the dependent variable. Say, for example, achievement of the students. That is the dependent variable. So if you consider the achievements of all the students, then you try to understand their levels of performance, average levels, because this is the average level, which we can call it as the baseline. Most of the students are at this level. Then after knowing that, then you have to introduce some kind of initiation, then to understand the change. At the end of the intervention, the data will be gathered. For example, here the example is British Industrial Fatigue Research Board studied the changes in productivity when work hours were shortened from 10 hours a day to 8 hours. The result indicated that the productivity was improved. How is it? This is the example for this particular interrupted time series design. It was studied for nearly 17 months. I think if we go through our study material, even though the time, our working hours are reduced, sir, even though working hours from 10 hours to 8 hours, it was reduced, still the result indicated that the productivity was improved. So this is one of the study which was undertaken of the British Industrial Fatigue Research Board. Even the time working hours are reduced from 10 hours to 8 hours, still the productivity was improved. This was, of course, studied for, I think you have also seen this kind of thing in our study material, where the British, 10 to 8 hours, before reducing the working day to 8 hours, they gathered data on hourly outcome for each month. So before reducing that hours of duty from 10 to 8, they studied for 17 months to establish the baseline. What is their productivity for each hour? that was studied by them for nearly 17 months. After 17 months, the work hours were reduced to 8 hours and hourly productivity data were gathered for each month for the next few months. So after studying the productivity for 17 months, then they reduced the work hours from 10 to 8. Then they studied the productivity for each hour for next few months. The researcher found that the reduction in daily work hours was followed by a noticeable increase in hourly output, and they concluded that shortening the workdays from 10 to 8 hours improved hourly productivity because the time, the longer duration, working hours. Very recently, this Infosys chairman was also talking about let us increase the working hours. No, it seems he doesn't have idea about this experiment. He wanted to increase the working hours. It may be from 8 hours to 10 hours or 12 hours. So like that, I think very recently he was mentioning, let us take more time for working, which was negated by many people. But here is the study which indicated is not the working hours. Increasing the working hours is a question of, it's a question of, the motivation levels, how best they are able to put their body, mind to the task. That is very important. So therefore, even the time is reduced from 10 hours to 8 hours, still the productivity has gone up. That is the result. So therefore, it's not the duration of the working hours, more number of working hours, but it is how best that we can motivate the workers. Even the time is reduced, the productivity will also go up. It's a question of commitment. It's a question of dedication. And the fatigue factor, the longer the duration, the fatigue factor may also creep into the picture. Am I right? Am I right, sir? The longer the duration, working hours,
Not
it may be for the
necessarily.
sake of only the longer duration, but actual output would be very less. That's the reason why they found that the fatigue factor is one of the factors which is for which the productivity is not going up. So there is no reason at all to have this 10 hours work. Let us reduce the 8 from 10 hours to 8 hours, and they compared the output. Finally, the 8 hours duration work schedule has given very good results than 10 hours duration of work hours. So that is because this is done only after finding out the baseline. Before conducting this experiment, they have studied for nearly 17 months. Then they have come to conclusion, this is the baseline. This is only the productivity of the produce would be this much for every hour. For every hour, this is only this much. That is the baseline. Then after reducing the 10 hours to 8 hours, then they studied for a few months. Later, they compared the productivity for every hour. What is the productivity when the duration was 10 hours? And what is the productivity when the duration is 8 hours? And what is per hour produced? So finally, the indication is through this experiment, they found that the time duration, reduction of time with regard to working hours has given better results. It's not just for the sake of increasing the duration, but how best they are able to dedicate, how best they are able to use their power. No, what's the physical power. So all those things will also come into the picture. That's the reason why there is no point at all increasing the duration of working hours. Better to reduce the duration hours. The fatigue factor is one of the important factors which is responsible for having this kind of higher productivity when the when the duration of the working hours is reduced. Problems of this particular interrupted time series reason is establishing the baseline. So is it possible to fix the baseline? That would be very, very difficult because these people have studied that for nearly 17 months and have come to the conclusion that this would be the productivity for every hour. That is the baseline for them. But it may not be that much easy to fix that baseline is one of the problems. And gathering the data repeatedly would be a problem also. Gathering the data repeatedly would be a problem also, from one time series to another series. So that would also be difficult. So then we should also the reliability, whether the data, whether this study, whatever that study conducted, is it reliable? That has to be tested also. Reliability means getting the consistency, getting the same results. If this experiment is conducted somewhere, I think then if we get the same results, then we can call this kind of experiment as reliability. Same experiment can be conducted somewhere. Then if you get the same results, and the results are the same for the first experiment, second experiment, third experiment, then we can say this experiment has the reliability or the data is reliable. So that is also questionable with regard to this interrupted time series designs, because there's a problem, to some extent there is a problem of fixing the baseline, which may not be completely correct, and gathering the data repeatedly would also be a problem. Repetition of the data, collection of the data repeatedly, so that may also be a problem. And the reliability of the data, reliability means getting the same results if the experiment is repeated somewhere also. That may also be a problem issue. So therefore, but anyway, I think this can also be used in the industries. Now this is done in the industries, the companies, with regard to working hours and the productivity. What is the input? Input means working hours. And what is the output means the productivity. This is the comparison between the input and the output. So input in terms of working hours, then of course, finally the outcome is the productivity. How much productivity is increased by way of reducing working hours. So it's a very good experiment here. So instead of having so much of time, that time is not very important, how best that we can use the manpower to the maximum extent, that will decide the productivity. So I think this is interrupted time series design from one series to another series. You are trying to compare the data, and the data, it may be reliable at times, it may not be reliable. That is one of the problems with regard to this interrupted time series design. Next design is non-experimental or correlational designs. My dear friends, there may be some kind of difficulty with regard to the experimental designs which we discussed in the earlier classes. There may be confusion also. You should be little bit careful about all these designs. But if you are fully prepared with the two experimental designs, and quasi-experimental designs may not be that much difficult. The experimental designs are the same, but only difference between the experimental design and the quasi-experimental design is this is not a complete standard one. There should be some variation, there should be some kind of deficiency with regard to quasi-experiment designs. But the designs, whatever we discuss in the experiment designs, can also be repeated, but those designs may not be that much standard ones. When there is no standard, automatically that will come under quasi-experimental designs. Now let us move to this non-experimental or correlational designs. Non-experimental or correlational designs. Here in this design, non-experimental. Friends, non-experimental correlational designs or correlational designs. Here in this design, the manipulation is not possible. Manipulation means change of the variables. You cannot change the variables. If the results are not good, what normally the experimenter does is, he changes the variables. But that kind of possibility is not there with regard to correlational designs. Here in this design, the manipulation is not possible, and the sole aim of this researcher is to describe what is happening, but not intervene in the process. So here there is no question of intervention, and there is no question of manipulation. And the example is the relation between the anxiety and the academic performance. So this non-experiment, is there any correlation between? The question is, the research question is there any significant difference between Is there a significant relationship between anxiety and the academic performance? That is the research question. This question has to be answered. For that purpose, the example that what we can do is, this would be a non-experimental design, as he is not manipulating any variable, to see how these manipulations affect the dependent variable. And for this purpose, we have the longitudinal designs. Under this non-experimental correlation designs, the type of design that we are going to study is, example is longitudinal design. Longitudinal design, that means, what is longitudinal design? The design is a longer kind of experiment. An experiment which would be conducted for a longer period. So that experiment is known as longitudinal experimental design. These designs are used by the developmental psychologists, as this is to uncover the developmental changes that occur as function of age. So when the age is going up, then what are the various changes that are occurring in the individuals? For that purpose, you are supposed to use this longitudinal design. You are not going to change anything here, my dear friends. You cannot manipulate. You just observe and describe what is happening. When the age is going up, what are the changes that are occurring in the individuals with regard to physical development, mental development, emotional development, then other development, language development also. See, if these developmental things are taking place on the base of the age, if you study these things, developmental stages or the developmental stages based on the age, that kind of study is known as longitudinal design. Example is remembering the things at different ages. So under this longitudinal design, you can take an example of remembering the things at different ages. Single group of children for testing memory strategies were 4, 8, and 12 years. Single group of children for testing memory strategies, they have considered 4, 8, and 12 years. Then what are their remembering strategies? Remembering strategies or memorizing strategies. Memorizing strategies at the age of 4, at the age of 8, at the age of 12. Group is the same, but only you are considering the age. While going up with regard to the age, how this remembering the things will differ. That you can also take up as a study for this longitudinal design. So remembering the things at different ages, for that you can use the single group. And for testing memory strategies, then you can also study at the age of 4, at the age of 8, and the age of 12. If you do it continuously, then this kind of study is known as longitudinal study, because the duration of study, come on, take up 4 hours. First experiment would be at the stage of 4. Then after 4 years, 8. That means 4, that means 8 years. Yeah. The experiment will run about nearly 8 years. I do not know. Is it really possible for the experimenter to live on? There may be some mortality also among the experimenters.
Possible, sir.
Yeah, possibility is also there, because
Yes.
if he wants, because they may also skip at times.
Yeah.
If they do not have that kind of patience, they can skip also. So they have to continuously observe these things at the age of 4, at the age of 8, at the age of 12 years. That means 8 years is a longer period. So such kind of things, especially for understanding the developmental stages, the changes that are occurring during the time of this physical and other things. So that can be studied, which will come under longitudinal design. The advantages are extraneous can be controlled. Extraneous variables can be controlled, permits depth and validity. Here, because you are not conducting any experiment as such, that's the reason why you can call it as non-experimental. Only you are observing the changes. You are observing, sorry. Now the time is 4. 30 minutes, okay? No call this for?
నాకు శారీ ఫోటో కావాలి అంటే మమ్మీ వేసుకొని ఉంది అవి డబ్బాతోని ఆర్డర్ నంబర్ కనిపించేటట్టు ఫోటో కావాలి.
That will be done by your mommy only.
Okay.
That's it. Sorry for the interruption because my daughter from Italy had called me. Sorry, friends.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Advantages of this is extraneous can be controlled. And again, this is not experiment as such. That's the reason why you can call it as non-experimental. But only thing is, you are observing, then you are describing. You are observing and describing only. Can be controlled. Permits depth and valid inferences, and disadvantages are many factors would operate things between the ages which cannot be controlled. Results may not be generalized. Researcher may lose the participants also. So these are the disadvantages of this longitudinal design, my dear friends. Many factors from the 4th year to 12th year, there would be many changes that are occurring. The candidate may not be available. And he may also escape. He may also disappear. He may not cooperate. Whenever the experimenter comes for observation or other things, he may not answer also. We may not cooperate for conducting the test. Since we are talking about the memory test, memory strategies. So therefore, I think that would also be a very difficult kind of thing because the period is very much the longer one. The non-cooperation from the participants would also be there. Apart from this, the other things would also be impacting this kind of study. We may also lose the participants. Some of them we may also lose. So this non-experimental or correlation designs. One is the longitudinal designs, which is meant for studying the changes that are occurring in the individuals. This is one of the examples. And also for this memory, I think remembering kind of things, example is also given. And he has studied at the age of 4, 8 and 12 years with regard to the remembering strategies of the participants. For 8 years, this particular experiment has run. And then if we come out with any changes that would be applicable, or it cannot generalize, but it cannot be generalized, but some idea it will throw. It will throw some idea with regard to the remembering the things at different ages. At different ages, how would be the remembering power? So for that purpose, you get some kind of idea, but you cannot generalize the results. And all individuals may not be the same, isn't it? Okay. Next one is cross-sectional design. So after having understood this longitudinal experimental design, now we are moving into understanding the cross-sectional design. This cross-sectional design requires one shot data collection at a single point. One shot data collection at a single point. Example, adolescents can be divided into 3 groups. Cross-sectional design requires one shot data collection at a single point. Example is, adolescents can be divided into 3 groups as early adolescents, middle adolescents, and late adolescents, and their anxiety can be studied, and it may be conducted that age may be a factor influencing the anxiety or not. If you want to understand the influence of the age with regard to the anxiety of the adolescents, then you can take up this kind of study. Are you ready to take this kind of study, to study the anxiety levels of the students? Hello?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Yes.
You
Why
can
not?
also take up this kind of studies, sir. You can also publish article in the journals.
Yes.
Students are there, they will be available. Then you can also, because all the students in the secondary education, they're all adolescents. You can divide them into early adolescents, middle adolescents, and late adolescents. Normally, adolescent ranges from 12 to 18 years. Those candidates are the persons who are between the age of 12 to 18. They're all adolescents. That is the adolescence age. Am I right?
Yes.
So you can divide them into three groups. Then try to understand their anxiety level. At the age, at the age of, 14 years, what is their anxiety level? Then at the age of 16 years, what is their anxiety level? Then with regard to the 18 years adolescents, what is their anxiety? So therefore, these are the three groups. At the age of 14, you can conduct a study. Anxiety test can be administered. Then middle-aged adolescents who are in the age of 16 years, we can call it as a middle adolescents. And late adolescents means at the age of 18. And their anxiety can be studied, and it may be concluded that age may be a factor influencing anxiety or not. Whether this age, because different ages, 14 years, 16 years, and 18 years, then you are testing the anxiety. So based on the results of that particular test, you can say the anxiety level of the 14 students or 18 years adolescents is higher than the adolescents of 16 and 14 years. That's how we can conclude based on the results of your study. Personally, I believe, the adolescents of 18 years old, their anxiety levels would be very high because during that time they would be in intermediate. They will be facing the examinations, and they also talk about the IIT, then NIT, then other things also. There will be so much of curiosity, anxiety, and other things. So therefore, the anxiety levels would be very high among the adolescents of 18 years age group, not 18 years age. Am I right, sir?
Yep.
It's only my general observation because that is the peak period the students should be competing for, admission into IITs, NET and other things. There must be so much of a heavy kind of, uh, preparation, and the anxiety levels would also be very high. We can also call it as test anxiety. We can also study the test anxiety before taking the test. What is their anxiety level? If you can take such kind of things, we call it as test anxiety. Just before commencing the test, what is their anxiety level? So that kind of anxiety is known as test anxiety. How is the anxiety level just before conducting the test or examination? We can call it as test anxiety. Then advantage of this is, what cross-sectional design is, quick and easily, no loss of the participants, because you are getting the result or the data at a single point. No loss of the participants. Extraneous can be controlled. Disadvantage, no assurance of equal groups. That's the only disadvantage. No assurance of equal groups. Age may be one factor, but other factors may not be the same. So the disadvantage of this particular cross-sectional design is it may not be all these early adolescents, middle adolescents, and late adolescents may not be a equal group with respect to so many factors. As far the age factor is concerned, they may be equal, but for the other factors, they may not be equal. So therefore, this kind of study, if you take up for studying the anxiety levels at different ages, we can use cross-sectional design. Cross-sectional design. Am I clear, sir?
Yes.
Also, madams? Hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Correlation.
Let us move on to the next one, correlational design. Correlational designs. Meant for studying the relationship between two or more variables. There are certain spelling mistakes here, please. In the PPT, which is shared, there are certain spelling mistakes, please. try to correct it. Okay, na?
Yeah.
Meant for studying the relationship between two or more variables, we can use this correlational design. Here, no independent variable is manipulated or there is no specific dependent variable. The relationship between two or more variables can be studied. Here you are trying to establish the relationship between two or more variables. You cannot say this is independent variable or this is dependent variable, but there are two or more variables can be compared how they are correlated with respect to certain things. So for that correlation purposes, here we are not considering whether independent variable or dependent variable, but what we want is two variables or more variables, two or more variables. For example, height versus weight. Example is height versus weight. All those people who are 6 feet, what is their weight? Is it 80 kgs? Is it possible, sir? If height increases, the weight should also increase. That is correlation. Am I right?
Yeah.
But it may not be the same in reality. Am I right?
Exactly.
There are weak people also. And no, if you ask me, if the height is 6 feet, their weight supposed to be 80 kilos. They are supposed to be they should carry 8 kilos of weight. If their height is 6 feet.
6 feet.
It's only theoretical kind of, supposition. But in reality, if height increases, the weight may not increase. That means there is a negative correlation. If height increases, if weight increases at the same time, we can call it as positive correlation. If there is no change at all, whether it's a positive or negative, if there is no change at all, then we can call it as zero correlation or no correlation. For example, if you take up this educational setting, example is students. If you take up class 10th students, in their marks in mathematics subject and their marks in English subject. Let us try to understand class 10th students marks in mathematics and English. Now we are trying to understand those fellows who got first rank in mathematics. Is he able to get first rank in English? So there, if he gets first rank in English too, then there would be positive correlation. So if the score is increasing in the mathematics marks, then similarly, the scores of the students in English subjects would also increase. Am I right, sir?
Yeah.
When one batch student scores increasing, then automatically the other batch students should also increase. Or otherwise, if one scores in one subject is increasing, similarly, there should also be trend, positive trend in other subject also. If that is there, we can call it as positive correlation. If one increases, the other will also increase. If the fellow who gets first rank in mathematics will also be getting first rank in English subject. Similarly, if it is happening, that trend continues. If that trend continues, then we can call it as positive correlation. So if one increases, the other one is not increasing. The marks in the mathematics subjects are very good, very high, but you do not see the marks in English subject for the same candidates. If they are very less, then automatically there is negative correlation. And if there is no change at all in one kind of set, there is no change in the marks, then we can call it as, if they are like that only, they don't change. There is no negativity, no positivity, no increase, no decrease. They would be like that only. Then in that case, we can call it as no correlation or zero correlation. So you can also test this kind of things also. It's very for the teachers, I think they will also be. They are very good in mathematics, but those fellows are not very good in English. Such kind of examples are many, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although they are very good at mathematics, they are not very good at English. The fellow who got first rank in mathematics may not be the case, getting the same rank in English too. So these are happening, sir. So for that purpose, we can use this correlational design. Am I right, sir?
Yes.
That's all about quasi-experimental research designs.
Yes, sir.
Now we are moving into next unit, that is 13, population parameters and statistics. This is not a big unit, but this unit is meant for understanding only the concepts. And the actual explanation of these things are actual, of course, understanding these things will come in unit number 14. That is the explanation of a detailed explanation of these population parameter statistics would be given in unit number 14. But try to understand the concepts in unit number 13. What is population, parameters, and statistics? These are some of the concepts. Raju, how are you?
Sir, fine, sir.
Are you able to follow?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. They are so clearly explaining
Yeah, am I
everything.
clear, sir?
You are very clear, sir.
Very good, very good. That is what required from you. If there is any difficulty, you please stop me also. No
No,
problem at
sir.
all.
You are
Okay?
so vehemently and loudly explaining everything.
Loudly in the
So,
sense already I have the speaker, isn't it?
No, no, no. Forcefully, let us put it.
Yeah, that is important for a teacher, sir.
yes, sir.
Exactly.
It should go up at times, it should also come down. The rhythm, the tone, the culture of the talk.
Yes.
That's a very much important for a teacher.
Yes, sir. You
At
so
times,
authoritatively are
yeah, the
explaining.
authoritative in the sense you are supposed to be a drama actor. Then only you become a good teacher. Otherwise, you cannot motivate the students.
Yes, sir.
And you should also know when to go up, when to come down.
Yes.
Anyway, it's all right, my dear friends. Thank you very much.
Thank-
Let us try to understand this unit
Yes.
number 13, population parameter statistics. Sampling, you know pretty well. We have been talking about sampling, randomization, isn't it?
Yeah.
So without sampling, especially social sciences, and the sampling without sampling is not that much easy for any researcher to conduct. That's the reason why the sampling is very, very important in the research studies. So sampling is one of the most important concepts in the study of statistics. And the basic to statistical theory and no applications of statistical theory in all, like in the subjects like physical, biological, and social sciences. In all the subjects, we can use statistical methods. So statistical theory at the base for this sampling. So behavioral researchers takes, and our psychology will come under behavioral researchers, behavioral sciences. Our psychology subject will come under behavioral sciences. So therefore, behavioral researchers will also use statistical applications, and automatically statistical applications will come or enter into the research when there is a sampling. So researcher takes some decisions regarding plan at the time of formulating the research design. His decision to sample is influenced by three factors. So the decision with regard to sample. Three factors are very essential while taking decision with regard to sample. Number one is size of the sample. How much sample is required? If the population is 1 lakh, so what would be the sample size? You cannot collect the data from 1 lakh participants because there is no time, there is no money, and also other factors are also not there with you. In that case, the only opportunity for you is you have to go for the sample. Then if the population is 1 lakh, then how much is sample? What would be the sample size? Is it 1,000, 2,000, or 3,000 participants out of the total population of 1 lakh? That you have to decide. Next one is cost involved in obtaining the elements. This is what I'm talking about. If you want to collect the data from those people, if the larger the size of the sample, then automatically you have to put so much of money from your pocket also. You have to collect the data, and those people are spread over. They may not be available in a single place, and you have to go around the places. Then you have to put money from your pocket, means it would also be a difficult for the researchers who doesn't have that financial resources. So it will also cut your pocket. So cost involved in obtaining the elements. Then convenience and accessibility of the elements. This should also be considered while fixing the sample. for fixing the sample, you have to decide with regard to size of the sample, how much sample is required or needed, then how much cost is going to incur, how much money has to be incurred for getting the data from those elements or the participants, then convenience, your time factor, and accessibility means it's a question of availability of those candidates very near and then far also. It's a question of accessibility. Do they available for me? Are they accessible to reach? So these are the three things or the factors that you have to consider while fixing the sample. So therefore, based on these factors, you have to think. The researcher has to sit. Am I able to reach all the participants? The time for my research is about only 6 months. Which in these 6 months, how much sample that I can fix? If I fix the sample, do I able to get the better results? Like this, he has to sit. Then he has to decide. Based on these factors, you have to decide the kind of sample. Then concept of population sample, the inferences will be drawn from a specified and identified group on selected measures. The well-specified and identifiable group is known as population or inverse. Friends, if you call it as inverse, it is also population. You may call it as either population or inverse. The inverse means the total participants, total number of participants. For example, how many teachers are there in Telangana? That is the population. How many lecturers are there in degree colleges? That is the population of lecturers in the degree colleges. It may be infinite, is unlimited. It is like fishes in a water. At times it's finite. You can identify them, you can catch up, isn't it? When they are identifiable group, you can catch them. But sometimes it is unlimited also, you do not know. Infinite. Finite and infinite, at times you do not know. If this is infinite, then that kind of population, in other words, is like fishes in a water. Can you count them?
Or stars in the sky.
Yeah, exactly. So that is at times, all these participants may not be countable. There is no possibility at times they will also escape. They will disappear. So therefore, those people who are specified, identifiable, we can call it as population or inverse. A populace may be defined as any identifiable and well-specified group, individuals. It may be finite or infinite. Example, all primary school teachers, colleges, or universities. Then the very example of this Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University Psychology Department. How many students are admitted in psychology subject for the year 2023 to 2023 to 2025? And all those students who are admitted for that batch is the population. Am I right?
Yep.
Among those students, then we have to pick up the sample. That is the population. That is the inverse. All the students of MSc Psychology during this period, 2023 to 2025, who are pursuing the course, there are, that is known as population or inverse. If you want to take up a study on those students. And from that population, you have to pick up a part of that. That part is known as sample. Am I right, sir?
Yes.
A sample is any number of persons selected to represent the population according to some rule or plan. So sample is any number of persons selected, whatever you like to have, how much sample is required, size of the sample, selected to represent the population. So that is a representative population. So if there is 1 lakh population means, if you are picking up about only 1,000 population means, this 1,000 participants or persons should represent 1 lakh population. They are the representative, that we can call it as representative sampling. Otherwise, there is no use. You cannot generalize the results also. So if it is representative sample, then only you can generalize the results. If it is not representative sample, you cannot generalize, but those results are applicable only that particular group across the country, across the globe. You cannot use those results. So sample is a part of the population which will represent the population. It is having the same characteristics, same factors. If I study 10 people among, among the 100 people, then on these 10 members or 20 members should represent that 100 members characteristics. They should represent that 100 members. So that is representative sample. So see, why are we sampling means it's not difficult, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. If there is a large group or a big group, you cannot collect the data on the base of your time and then resources. That's the reason why what we take up is we go for random samplings or samplings. Then parameters and statistics. A numerical characteristic of a population, such as its mean or standard deviation, is called a population or parameter. So if we calculate the mean of the population, that is a parameter. Median of the population, standard deviation, average deviation. So these are all parameters. When these things are calculated on the base of the population, then we can call them as parameters. Parameters are applicable to only the population. But whereas statistics, a quantity calculated from a sample such as its mean or SD is called a sample. So if we can calculate the mean of a sample, we can call them as statistic. Statistic is that which is considered for sampling. If we calculate the mean of a sample, standard deviation of sample, then we can call it as a statistic. But if we can calculate the mean or standard deviation of a population, we can call it as parameter. That is the difference between statistic and parameter. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Parameter is related to population. Statistic is related to sample.
P to P, S to S.
Yes. A sample is any number of cases less than the total number. So your sample should be less than the total number of cases in a population from which it is drawn. Sample consists of only a small portion of the total population being investigated, and it should be representative. This is what we discussed so far. It should be representative, it should be part, it should be less than the population, and it's a small portion of the population. So population for our purpose, we consider the human beings or the persons. So population can also be defined as it may be object, or it may be things, or it may be human beings, isn't it? Identifiable things, identifiable subjects, identifiable human beings. So that is known as population. But for our study, for the purpose of our studies, we are considering human beings. Therefore, our population, for our purpose, we consider the persons. Isn't it? How many chairs are there means that is also population. How many benches are there? There is also population of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University. How many benches are there? How many chairs are there? Can also call it as population. How many people are there? When it is considered human beings, how many people are there? So therefore, it may be things, or it may be items, or it may be human beings which are specified and identifiable. We can call it as population. Then probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling techniques are. Probabilistic means the other concept that is included in the sampling is probabilistic and non-probabilistic. Probable means likely. Likely. Probable sampling methods means likely. You think if a coin is tossed, 50% of chances, it may be tail or it may be head. Isn't it? Yes. Probability is there, 50% probability with regard to the tossing of the coin. So therefore, the size of the parent population or universe from which the sample is taken must be known to the investigator. It's better always knowing the total population, then only you can decide from that population the sample you want to take up for your study. Each element of the population must have equal chance to be included. That only the representation. Otherwise, it's not a representative. If there are 100 students, if the sample is good, means everybody has equal chances for inclusion in the sample. The result sample must be clearly specified. The lesser the sample, the higher the error. హలో సార్, అర్థమైందా?
అవునండి.
తెలుగులో చెప్తున్నాను సార్.
Yes.
తక్కువ శాంపుల్ తీసుకొని ఎక్కువ పాపులేషన్ ఉంటే చాలా కష్టం అవుతుంది. శాంపులింగ్ ఎర్రర్ ఎక్కువగా ఉంటుంది. రైట్? ది హయ్యర్ ది శాంపుల్, ది లెస్సర్ ద ఎర్రర్. రైట్?
Yes, sir.
సపోజ్ ఫర్ ఎగ్జాంపుల్ ఒక 100 మెంబర్స్ ఉంటే, మీ క్లాస్లో 100 మెంబర్స్ ఉన్నారు అనుకుందాం. If you think there are 100 students in your class, if you collect the data from all these 100 students, there would not be any error at all.
Yeah.
అందరి దగ్గర డేటా సేకరిస్తే ఇంకా ఎర్రర్ ఏముంటుంది? ఉండదు కదా. ఎర్రర్ creeps in when the sample is very less,
Yes.
isn't it? The non-probability sampling techniques are quota sampling, accidental sampling, judgmental sampling, snowball sampling, saturation sampling, and dense sampling. These are the various sampling procedures which will come under non-probability sampling techniques. So we have also missed out certain things in probability sampling techniques: simple random sampling technique, stratified random sampling technique, cluster sampling, area sampling. These are the probability sampling techniques. Probability, likelihood, likely to happen, likely to happen. So we can, and those sampling techniques are probability sampling techniques, which we can, which are categorized as simple random sampling technique, stratified random sampling technique, cluster sampling, area sampling. And non-probability sampling techniques are quota sampling, accidental sampling, judgmental, snowball, saturation, and dense sampling. So these are the various sampling techniques, and explanation and a detailed kind of discussion will be held in the next class, that is tomorrow, about all these sampling techniques. These are only the classification of probable and non-probable sampling techniques. We can discuss in detail about all these sampling techniques in the tomorrow's class. And for today, this is Dr. Krishnari signing off. Thank you.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
ఏం మీరు ఇద్దరే మాట్లాడుతున్నారు సార్? మిగతా వాళ్ళు ఏమైపోయినారు?
థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్, థ్యాంక్ యూ.
ఏమైందమ్మా ఇంతవరకు?
లేదు సార్, చక్కగా మీరు
Let us try to understand. Thank you.
థ్యాంక్ యూ సార్.
మీరు లేకపోతే నాకు డౌట్ వస్తుంది.
నో సార్, నో సార్, వీఆర్ ఆన్ ద లైన్.
Whenever I am here in the present, say good morning or good afternoon. If I am leaving, okay, sorry, thank you, sir. Okay, na?
ఓకే సార్, అంతే కదా.
That will be well and for everybody, not only myself. నాకేం థ్యాంక్స్ చెప్పవలసిన పని లేదు.
Thank you, sir.
చెప్తే మంచిది.
Thank you, sir.
The relations would be very good. Am I right?
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, right. Thank you.